Welcome to the Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kate Harper of the 61st District in Montgomery County. In 2005, Congress passed the Real ID Act, which changed the requirement for driver's licenses to be accepted as identifying documents by the federal government. Pennsylvania is now a little late working towards making compliant licenses available in 2019. Can you travel on an airplane without a Real ID compliant license? Today you can. What should you do to obtain one, and what do you need to do while you're waiting for them to become available? These are the things we'll be discussing today. And joining me on the show to answer these questions is PennDOT's Deputy Secretary of Driver and Vehicle Services, Kurt Myers. Mr. Myers, thanks for coming on the show.
Kate, it's always a pleasure to be here.
Good. Okay, so I know that we have a stay, if you will, from the federal government right now on Real ID compliant licenses. So to answer the first question, if somebody's got a regular Pennsylvania driver's license, they can still fly.
That's correct.
In the States anyway.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So before we get started on the tougher questions, why don't you tell my viewers a little bit about yourself? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? And how did you get a job as Deputy Secretary of PennDOT?
Well, I grew up in central Pennsylvania and have lived here all my life. Other than the 4 years that I spent in Ohio, I'm a graduate of Kenyon College in Ohio. I spent, after my graduating from college, I spent 20 years in the private sector running an automotive aftermarket business. And had the opportunity in the late 1990s to come to work for the Commonwealth in PennDOT, and became Deputy Secretary in 2007.
So who was governor then?
Governor Rendell was the governor at that point in time. My original appointment was back in 1998.
So you've been Deputy Secretary of PennDOT under several governors.
Since 2007, yes, I have been under Governor Rendell and certainly Governor Corbett and now Governor Wolf.
So I think you're bipartisan. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair statement.
All right. And you're also fortunate that the Secretary of Transportation, Leslie Richards, is a transportation planner by trade and from my county, Montgomery, and I'm sure she's good to work with.
Yes, she's great to work with. She's been a true asset to not only PennDOT, but certainly the Commonwealth. We're really proud of the work that she's done. Good.
Now, in the 61st District, which is in Montgomery County, transportation's a big issue. Traffic congestion's a big issue, SEPTA's a big issue, the turnpike's a big issue, so people are always talking about that. And many, many, many people have driver's licenses. In fact, when they have to give them up because of age or infirmity or something, it's tough because getting around the burbs is very tough. So, but those are things you probably deal with every day. Now we have a different issue that the federal government is saying our driver's licenses aren't good enough as identification documents. What's the problem?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, Kate, the federal government passed a law in 2005 called the Real ID Act. It was very slow to be adopted by states across the country. And in fact, as you know, today in 2018, there are only 27 states in that range that are now approved or have been certified by the federal government Department of Homeland Security as having a Real ID compliant driver's license. The fact of the matter is that for years, even before the Real ID Act was passed, Pennsylvania has always been a leader in the security of our products as well as the processes that we follow. And so from the standpoint of our product, there is not a significant difference in the actual product that we produce today and what people would look at and say that's a Real ID product. From a simple standpoint of what we need to put on the driver's license, there'll be a gold star on the driver's license once we're in a position to be able to produce the driver's licenses for Real ID purposes. But so most of the work that needs to be done is behind the scenes. It's in processes and procedures that we need to follow to come into compliance with the requirements of the Real ID Act.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What you're saying is our current driver's licenses are pretty good as being identification driver's licenses. In other words, I know that you've done things to the processes so they're not easily copied. You've done things to make them stand out. If you look at them in different lights, you can see things that would be hard to copy.
Correct.
On a Xerox machine or something like that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, but what I understand about Real ID is not that the piece of the little card itself is the problem. It's that in order to get that little card and be compliant, we have to do pretty much what you'd have to do to get a passport. In other words, you have to produce proof of your own identity such that a passport office would think it was good proof of your identity. Is that about right?
It's true, and again, in many cases, we've been requiring these documents for years: a birth certificate with a raised seal, the Social Security card, as well as proofs of residency. The difference now is that there are additional steps that need to be taken to ensure that, from the standpoint of Homeland Security, that they find us in compliance. Because at the end of the day, although we do many of the things that are required within Real ID, we still need to have their compliance. We need to have them say that we are in compliance for us to be able to issue Real IDs long term.
Okay, so the way we do driver's licenses has to meet like a checklist of stuff that the federal government thinks we ought to have in hand or at least look at before we issue a driver's license.
That's correct.
And that's so that a terrorist can't pretend to be Kate Harper or you.
Right. The idea certainly is, and this really came out of the events of 9/11, which were clearly a tragedy at all levels. And the Congress decided to pass the Real ID Act back in 2005 as part of that response to what occurred at 9/11. And so the idea here is to mitigate to the degree possible, ensuring that people who are not qualified to be able to get a driver's license, not only from the standpoint of driving, but also now the role that we play day in and day out as the go-to identifier, if you will, from a standpoint of identification.
And you really are that. I have to tell you that when I go to a doctor's office, they ask me for my insurance card, but they also ask me for my driver's license.
Right, right.
They trust it.
That's true. And the fact is that the driver's license identification card has become the de facto identifier for people to utilize, whether it's at the doctor's, the grocery store, or many other areas that require some form of identification.
Okay, so here's the problem. The problem is, lots of people in my district fly often. They might fly to visit their kids who live in other states. They might fly to go to Florida when the weather's terrible up here and nice down there. They might fly for business. They might, my own brother is a banker whose territory is west of the Mississippi, and he lives in Philadelphia. Okay, so he flies all the time.
Right.
And people want to know, why does the federal government keep issuing these terrible bulletins saying in 6 months you're not going to be able to fly anymore? What do we do about that?
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the timelines.
Okay.
It'll help your viewing audience understand where we're at this point and where we plan to be this time, essentially next year, then moving towards the actual date where Homeland Security will enforce having a Real ID for the purposes of getting on a commercial aircraft. First of all, we applied for an extension back in September of 2017 from the Department of Homeland Security. That extension was granted for 1 year, which takes us now to October 10th of 2018.
So you better get back to the office and get working on this. Okay?
Well, we have a lot of staff that are working on this and working very diligently. Our intentions are that in the latter part of the summer, we will apply for another extension to fill that gap between the October 10th of 2018 date and March 1st of 2019, when we will be in a position to be able to actually issue Real IDs.
So we're going to get another bulletin in September telling us we can't use our licenses on airplanes.
No, I don't think so. We're working very closely with the Department of Homeland Security. We're in communications with them on a regular basis. They're very, very pleased with our progress in implementing Real ID. So I think that they will be more than willing to work with us as we get into the fall to get that extension, the additional extension to bridge that gap until we're ready to be able to issue real IDs. Then at that point in time, our customers across the state will have an opportunity, if they want a real ID, because as you know, and the way the legislation was written, it makes it optional. Not everybody has to get one. And so those individuals who would like to get one will be in a position to be able to do so. If they'd like to get one before the date that where there are no more extensions and where this requirement will go in place for commercial flights, which is October 1st of 2020, they'll have plenty of time to be able to do that. But I think it's important to keep in mind that from the standpoint of TSA, TSA has a long list of documents that are acceptable over and above the driver's license itself. So if you don't have a real ID, but you have a passport or a passport card, all of those are acceptable
Sure.
documents.
Most people don't realize this, that you can get a card that's a wallet-sized card that fits in your, that looks like a driver's license, that essentially says you've met the requirements and own a passport.
Correct.
That's about $55,
It's
I think.
$55
like
to apply for it separately first time, and it's a product that's good for 10 years.
So many people say to me, when I explain that to them, they say, why don't I just take my passport?
They certainly can, and it's one of the things that we say to individuals as we go through this process of getting communications out about the process to get a real ID. If you've already got a passport or a passport card or some other form of identification that's acceptable to TSA, we'd really recommend that you just simply wait until your regular renewal cycle to get your real ID.
Okay, great. Now we're going to talk about what you're going to need when you get there.
Sure.
Now, it's been a very long, what we're going to need to produce, okay? It's been a very long time since I got my driver's license at the age of 16, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember taking a birth certificate. Maybe I did. What do you need to get a new driver's license, and what are we oldsters going to need to get our driver's licenses renewed?
Right. Well, there are two groups within Pennsylvania that we're dealing with from the standpoint of how we're phasing in this process. Since about 2003, we required individuals to when they got a license, whether they were 16 and a half years old getting their first time
Right.
license or moving in from out of state, we required them to produce a birth certificate with a raised seal, Social Security card, and then 2 forms of residency documents.
All 4 of those things.
Right,
Okay.
right. And so those are the same documents that you'll need to be able to get for a real ID. Now, in most of those cases, all those documents were imaged, meaning that
So they're in your system.
correct.
Okay, cool.
And for those individuals, actually beginning March 1st of this year, we'll be sending out about 3.5 million postcards across the Commonwealth to individuals who
Wish you were here?
Yeah, right. These are all individuals that received their licenses from 2003 forward.
Okay.
Now, it's not a guarantee that we will have all the records we need to be able to issue a real ID, but the idea here is to pre-vet people so that if we've got all the documents that we need, what you'll be able to do, you'll be notified of that fact. We'll send you back a note saying, look, we've checked our records, we have everything that we need, you're pre-vetted. And so
you get a gold star on your license?
Not right away.
Okay.
You'll be able then at the time that they're available, which will be March of 2019, you'll be able then to go online, be able to pay a fee for the real ID, and then in turn we'll send you your updated real ID with the gold star on it in the mail, meaning that you'll never have to come to a driver licensing center to have that whole process done.
Okay, so hold that thought. So if you got your driver's license after 2003, and if you submitted all the documents we've been talking about, a birth certificate with a raised seal, a couple forms of residency, and another form of identification.
The Social Security card.
Social Security card. If you had all of them and PennDOT was able to successfully image them and check them out,
Right.
basically, getting a real ID license is not going to be a hassle at all.
It should not be, no.
Okay, now if you're like me and you were well past the age of 16 in 2003, stay with us because we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back and talk about how we're going to get our new driver's licenses after they go into effect. Stay with us.
Did you know that on October 4th, 1911, the statues that greet visitors in front of the state capitol building in Harrisburg were dedicated to the citizens of the Commonwealth? In 1902, George Gray Bernard was commissioned to design the figures that embellish the front of the Capitol building. During the installation period, Bernard explained to the General Assembly what each sculpture symbolized. The Southern group, titled The Burden of Life, depicts the story of Adam and Eve followed by the fall of man in the forms of despair. The Northern group, titled Love and Labor, depicts male and female figures reaping fruits of labor and advances to a new Adam and Eve who gaze westward into the future. Recently, both sculptures underwent restoration to prevent further deterioration from their natural beauty. Now you know.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Welcome back to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kate Harper of the 61st District in Montgomery County. And today we're discussing real ID driver's licenses with Deputy Secretary Kurt Myers of PennDOT. We've been talking about the fact that if you got your driver's license in Pennsylvania 2003 or later, you probably already produced enough identification to comply with the federal rules, which are basically designed to protect us from terrorists.
Correct.
Fair?
Correct.
So suppose you are a woman of a certain age, and you got your driver's license long before 2003. After you go through the initial push and you pick out all the people for whom you already have appropriate identification, they're going to get a little postcard saying you're cool, you can get a real ID license. Mm-hmm. Then you're going to get people like me, and it's been a few years since I have gotten a driver's license. What am I going to need to do to get a real ID license?
Well, you're not alone, and I'm in that group as well. It's about 65% of Pennsylvania's population that has driver's licenses or ID. We're about 6.5 million individuals that received their licenses or IDs before that 2003 date. All of those individuals will be sending a postcard to beginning in September of 2018. Now, unfortunately, because we don't have the records imaged on our database, those individuals will have to bring in the documents that we discussed earlier. But we are giving them the opportunity to pre-vet, if you will, to get that done before the timeline when the real ID is available in March of 2019. They can go to any one of our 71 driver licensing centers to be able to do that.
Hold on for a second. We have two of them, one in Harleysville and one in Norristown. And we have another one not too far, Willow Grove.
Norristown is a full-service driver licensing center. They would have to go to a driver licensing center.
They can't go to the little
not to our photo
office.
centers.
Okay,
no.
fine.
So they would have to go to a driver licensing center. There, they'll be able to take the documents in. The documents will be imaged, they'll be vetted, by our staff. And then at that point in time, an indicator will go on their records so that when the Real ID is available for them, they'll be notified.
Okay, so let's just say I go to Norristown, I take my birth certificate and my social security card and 2 forms of ID, other ID.
Of residence documents.
How about my passport? That should be good enough.
Well, passport doesn't have your residence on it, but it can be used as an ID in lieu of a birth certificate.
Okay, so I need a birth certificate, the race seal, or a passport, and 2 forms of ID that show that I live where I live, like a utility bill, something like that?
Yes, right.
Okay.
That's correct.
And I go to Norristown and they scan them in.
Right.
And they give me a gold star. Or they tell me I can get a gold star license later, right?
Correct.
Okay, so now let me ask you a question. In these days of computer hacking, I'm thinking, PennDOT, can I trust PennDOT to keep my stuff safe? What if somebody wants to pretend to be Kate Harper?
Yeah, we take the protection of personal identifiable information very seriously at PennDOT. We certainly have, from a security standpoint in our systems, significant amounts of security within our system to alleviate people coming in and attempting to hack our system. We also require all of our employees who are able to access this information, require those individuals to go through an FBI background check, which includes fingerprinting, as well as name-based check of their records. We want to ensure to the degree possible and to the highest degree possible that individuals that do have access to this information are ones that understand their responsibilities, that this is, just like if it was their own information, it's something that they would not want to have released to somebody who was unauthorized. So we're very proud of the efforts that we've made in that area, and the fact of the matter is, I think that our customers can feel confident that we are taking the steps necessary to protect that information within our systems. Okay,
so you feel that PennDOT has an appropriate firewall in place to keep any hacker from getting in there and stealing, a copy of my birth certificate or something, right?
That's correct.
All right. And you also feel that the people at PennDOT who deal with it have been vetted so that they can be trusted not to use it for inappropriate or improper means.
That's correct as well.
All right. Now, there's another group of people we haven't talked about today. Those are people who don't have driver's licenses but use the PennDOT ID.
Right.
Would they be able to go through this system also?
Absolutely. You're able to get a Real ID, which is not a driver's license, if you don't have a driver's license. You may only have one Real ID product. So there are some individuals that have a driver's license and an ID.
Yeah, non-driver ID is what we call them.
And so in those cases, you'd have to make the choice as to whether or not you wanted a driver's license Real ID or an ID Real ID. But other than that, yes, you can certainly get an identification card that would be a Real ID product.
Okay, so let's back this up. Why are we doing all this? What is it supposed to accomplish?
Well, again, from the standpoint of the federal law, it's to strengthen the issuance of the driver's licenses across the country. And when I say driver's license, it's more the broader identification card that exists within each of the states. I want to be clear, this is by no means a national ID. These are still our driver's licenses. We still follow our procedures. There are minimum standards that the Department of Homeland requires, but as to how your driver's license looks, other than the gold star, the fact is that the states have the ability to develop and design those cards, and we have the freedom to be able to do that. That's not dictated by the federal government. And most importantly, there is not a national database where all of this information is stored.
Well, I remember some of my colleagues making that argument that Pennsylvania should not participate in Real ID because we don't want to make our citizens part of a national database so that the federal government, Uncle Sam can be, I don't know, eavesdropping on us or something.
Well, and in fairness, in the early years, there was a lot of misinformation that existed about Real ID. No one's fault. It was just that it was new, and there was a lot of information that wasn't clear. And certainly now, as we noted, it's now 13 years since the law was passed. there's a lot more clarity as to what the requirements are, what the expectations are. And so many of these things that were unknown or not clear back in the late 2000s now have been addressed.
So we don't have to say to Homeland, here, take a look. We have to say to them, here's how we do it. We meet your rules.
Right. Interestingly enough, and I think you'll find this interesting as well as your viewers, is the fact that when we start actually issuing a real ID with the gold star on it, we will not be in compliance at that point in time. Homeland Security requires that you begin to issue the product, and they won't find you in compliance until after a period of time has gone by that you've actually been issuing the product.
To say that you've been doing it right. Yes,
Correct.
These licenses you've been handing out, Pennsylvania, they're good as
Yep.
far as we're concerned at Homeland Security for being real identification.
That's correct.
Okay, so let's go back over, because we only have a couple minutes left.
Sure.
Let's go back over the timeline. If I'm a person sitting here who actually has a passport, which I use when I fly, and I don't have time to stand in line at Norristown. You know, picture this, okay? And I'm sure many of my viewers are the same way. Should I just wait until my next license renewal comes up to get this done? Or do you recommend that I vet it early on a day when I'm not too busy by running over to Norristown and giving them the 4 forms of ID?
Well, that's really going to be the customer's choice. One of the things that will also be occurring is that we're going to open up 5 new mega centers, if you will, that will be able to issue real IDs as well.
Okay.
So customer choice will actually expand from the standpoint of whether or not you want to pre-vet, you want to have your documents vetted after the documents or the real ID is available. You can either, in some cases, get it through the mail if you're not in a hurry. There are other cases where if you need it because tomorrow you're flying and you need a real ID.
Yes, those people show up at my office and ask me about passports.
So you'll be able to go to a specific center that issues real ID over the counter.
Okay, good.
And there will be certainly options in the southeast region for customers to be able to do that at certain centers. We're trying to keep this as convenient as possible for the customer, understanding the need to do this for individuals who want to opt in. One thing we haven't talked about yet, but just so everyone knows, there is a $30 fee to get a real ID, whether it's a driver's license or an ID. The fee is the same. It's a one-time fee, though. You only pay it one time.
You
After
still
that,
have to pay your registration fee.
you do, but one of the things that we've done with the with that process is we wanted to make sure that no customer lost time on an existing license. So
Okay.
if you come in and you received a license 2 years ago and you come in March of 2019 for a real ID, you'll pay your $30 one-time fee. You'll pay a renewal fee, which is $30.50. But what will happen is when we issue that product to you, you'll get a product that will be good for 6 years.
Oh.
So you won't lose the 2 years you still had on your old license. You'll have that added to your license along with the 4 years. I will tell you that Secretary Richards and I, and along with others in PennDOT, had many discussions about that. And it was foremost from her standpoint that we ensured that in deploying this, we kept this as customer friendly, and as well as making sure that value was there for the customer and that no one lost anything in the process.
Well, that's a good place to stop. PennDOT, we're looking out for us, taking care of things, trying to get this real ID done in a way that we can all afford it and in a timely manner. That's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. If you need assistance on real ID or any state government program, just feel free to contact me at my Bluebell office. That address will be on your screen in just a moment. Thanks for watching. Join me again for Legislative Report, and thank you, Deputy Secretary Kurt Myers.
Thank you.